Welcome to the 1455 Author Series, a virtual portal into the minds of writers that explores their latest work, inspirations, and more. The Gatepost is about a lost scientist desperate to find his way home, and a daughter trying to solve the mystery of her father's disappearance 20 years later. It's a contemporary speculative thriller, blending science and ancient cosmology in a way that ends up taking its characters to places beyond the boundaries of normal space, time, and human perception. The novel takes place mostly in Vermont, and many of the settings will be familiar to those of you who have been here, who live here in Vermont. I mean, here in an art studio in Vermont. The novel also takes place in a series of stranger, more hallucinatory settings that might be aspects of either the Mesoamerican underworld or a multiverse. It's really, above all, it's an adventure story. It's a story about love and family, and my hope is that it's an entertaining and immersive read. It's always mysterious to me where ideas come from. They just sort of seed themselves in my imagination somehow, or in my subconscious mind. And then the successful ones, the ones that actually turn into stories, slowly gain strength until they clamor to be released. I know this may sound a little, weird, like the movie Alien, but it's nowhere near that weird or traumatic. And it's really the best way that I can describe it. In part, the Gatepost was inspired by a research trip that I made to Oaxaca, Mexico, where I was looking into the use of hallucinogenic mushrooms in ancient Mesoamerican shamanism. I had a chance to interact with two very special traditional healers, or curanderas, and explored the profoundly evocative ruins of several Zapotec ceremonial centers, the most important of which is Monte Alban. You might say that these experiences in Oaxaca kind of watered the seed or fed the little alien inside my imagination. And by the time I got back from Mexico, I was well along the path to writing The Gatepost. It's always a tough question about creative and personal inspirations, but if I had to boil it down to my biggest literary influences, I'd probably, come up with a list that would include, Tolkien, Hemingway, Cormac McCarthy, Ursula K. Le Guin, David Mitchell, more recently Kazuo Ishiguro, Madeline Miller, Richard Powers, Jennifer Egan, just to name a few. In terms of the Gatepost specifically, I can think of two recent novels that definitely had an influence. One of them is Susanna Clarke's wonderful contemporary portal fantasy, Piranesi, which is about a character who gets stuck in an uncanny and possibly hallucinatory parallel world. And Eleanor Catton's Birnam Wood, which is a tense literary thriller in a rural or wilderness setting with the hidden machinations of a powerful tech entrepreneur looming in the background. So those comparable books may give you an idea of a little bit about what sort of the area that the Gatepost is in. Yes, I will read an excerpt, just a quick excerpt. This is from chapter 1. Woodgate, Vermont, March 2024. Esme Weatherhead kept catching herself talking to a ghost. She would be snowshoeing through the forest, or sitting at her writing desk, or splitting wood, or doing some other chore in or around her rural Vermont farmhouse, and she would find herself having a conversation with a man who was no longer alive, talking about something she was reading, perhaps, or asking him for personal advice. Mostly these conversations took place inside her head, but sometimes she would be sitting in an empty room or trudging along through the snowy forest, surrounded by nothing but dormant trees, and she would hear herself actually voice the words aloud to the empty air or to the occasional blue jay or chickadee. It had been happening more and more over the last few months, so often, in fact, that she was increasingly worried that she might be losing her mind. At best, she was becoming a solitary eccentric with a penchant for nature walks and conversing with dead people. Maybe she was a Wiccan. There were apparently a great number of Wiccans scattered around the state of Vermont, and spending most of the fall and winter alone back on the remote 300-acre property that had been her childhood home certainly seemed to have brought out that tendency in her. It wasn't that she necessarily believed in the occult, but there was something about this familiar property, in particular the forested parts of it, that she'd never quite perceived before, a spine-tingling feeling that there were spirits present, or at least one particular spirit. Maybe it was the isolation. Maybe it was a sort of natural inclination that came over women who lived on their own in the forest. You either got a pet or you started talking to ghosts. City-dwelling friends, when they came up to visit, tended to find the property spooky. Other than owls and turkeys and the occasional barking fox or pack of trilling coyotes, it could be eerily quiet at night. The nearest neighbor was more than 2 miles away. You couldn't see any other houses, not even the lights in their windows. Esme understood how someone used to the press and clamor of the city might feel uncomfortable. For her own part, especially for the recent uneasy suspicion, except for the recent uneasy suspicion that she was losing her mind, she'd always felt quite at home at Woodgate. It had always felt to her like a world unto itself, a timeless refuge from the frenetic madness of everywhere else. It was why she'd thrown away what most people considered an enviable life in San Francisco, the high-powered job, the handsome, sensitive husband, to move back here. Well, it was one reason. The main reason was that she was determined to write a book about her father, the man whose ghost she'd been conducting all these one-sided conversations with. So far, the book wasn't going so well. In fact, after a solid 8 months of concentrated work, she still seemed to be stuck in the research phase. When she sat down at her writing desk, she would often begin by rereading his New York Times obituary. Dr. Gregory Weatherhead, 42, of Corinth, Vermont, missing since June of this year, has been declared dead as of December 31st, 2004. Born September 7th, 1963, Dr. Weatherhead was a beloved father, husband, and friend. He was known to the public as the author of an internationally best-selling book on indigenous shamanic practices and hallucinogenic experience, the publication of which dovetailed with other popular books on similar topics by Carlos Castaneda, R. Gordon Wasson, and Richard Evans Schultes. Dr. Weatherhead grew up in the Boston area, son of an investment banker and a school teacher. He received a BA in biology and a PhD in archaeology at Yale, during which he spent 3 years in the field researching ancient Mesoamerican sites in the Valley of Oaxaca, Mexico. After receiving his PhD in 1990, Dr. Weatherhead accepted a tenure-track appointment at Columbia. In 1998, he resigned that position and moved to rural Vermont, where he spent the remainder of his life pursuing independent research. Dr. Weatherhead is survived by his loving wife, Silvana Rodriguez Weatherhead, 43, and daughter, Esmeralda Weatherhead, 12. In lieu of flowers, the family requests that donations be made to the Vermont Center for Unidentified and Missing Persons. Esme had been 6 years old in 1998 when her father and mother had purchased Woodgate, using the royalties from the best-selling book referenced in the obituary, and some investment funds they'd inherited from Gregory's parents. She had a good view of the property from the window of her writing nook, the stately old maples at the edge of the forest showing the first hint of budding, the hayfield still covered by snow, everything bathed in the liquid red-gold light of a late winter evening in Vermont. Gregory Weatherhead had been the kind of father who took an interest in the moment-by-moment details of his young daughter's life in a way that Mama, though well-meaning, hadn't been temperamentally suited to doing. He would help her with her homework, lead her on hikes and cross-country ski excursions, read classic adventure novels to her at bedtime, sit with her at the kitchen table or beside the wood stove, talking about everything under the sun. And then suddenly, one sunny day in June, when Esme was 12, the tragedy arrived that would put an end to her idyllic childhood. That morning, following his usual habit, Gregory Weatherhead walked up into the forest above the hayfield, but he never came back. I'll stop there. So, process, every writer has a different process, a different way of getting it done. But here's my basic process. I try to write every single day, including weekends and holidays. Sometimes just a little, on better days, more. I don't keep track of my hours or a word count because over time I've learned that sometimes a good day will involve cutting more words than you write. There's never anything easy about writing a novel, of course, but for me the most difficult part is coming up with a first draft. When that's done, I usually heave a huge sigh of relief because I know the story's there on the page. And writing a first draft is the hardest thing to do. It's like sort of squeezing blood from a stone. It's taking something from thin air, from nothing. And so for me, what I like to do is get it done as quickly as I can, because that's the hard part. And then I have months and months of revision to look forward to. I actually really enjoy revision and rewriting. So when I'm writing a first draft, this difficult first draft where you're taking something out of thin air, I do it longhand with just a pen on paper. I fill up several composition books over maybe 6 weeks or 2 months or 3 months. And when that is done, when I have the complete arc of a story down on a page, not that I can really read it. I can barely read my own handwriting. But what I do is when I have it done in these journals, I type it in. I call this and I edit as I go. So this is technically it's a second draft, but I call it a transcription draft. Then what I'll do is I'll take time. I'll step back and take time to analyze what I have. And I'll often create a spreadsheet to keep track of scenes, to get some kind of basic x-ray of the novel's shape. And then I'll use this material to shape the first major revision. What I'll do is I'll make notes to myself about things like character, structure, narrative drive, setting, timeline, etc. And once I'm satisfied that I've done enough of this analytical work to plunge back into the story in a way that I think will be productive, I'll print out the transcription draft and use it along with the spreadsheet and sometimes an extrapolated outline to write a whole new draft. So I write from the beginning. I don't use the same document. I use it, but print it out, and then I write the whole thing over. And I do this several times. Sometimes I incorporate beta readers who give me advice about how the story's going, but mostly it's something that I cook up on my own. And this process of rewriting, stepping back to analyze, and then re-inhabiting the draft, each time more vividly, as if you're experiencing a vivid dream, is really key to my process. And usually, it's taking place over months, and the months stretch out into years until I'm satisfied enough with what I have to send it to my agent. I do tend to work on various other projects while when I finish a draft, I let it sit for a while. I think it's good to sort of let it ferment for a while. So I have other things that I work on. But keeping in mind the research and the beta readers and various revision drafts, the Gatepost took me about 2 years to write. And of course, there was a lot of feedback after that, a lot of back and forth after that, once it had been accepted for publication with my agent and with my editor. So that's basically my process for the Gatepost. So how has my literary career developed? Well, I have been studying and writing fiction seriously for nearly 30 years, and it's been a long, hard struggle with some very high highs, some very low lows. And after about a decade of writing and writing and trying, I finished a short story collection, and I got an agent for it. The agent, who I really loved, was unable to sell the book. It's very hard to sell short story collections. And eventually we parted ways. But I did write a lot of stories during that period. I wrote several multiple draft novel projects that ultimately failed, meaning they didn't go out into the world. And so there's a lot of kind of starts and stops and false starts and things like that. But eventually, after almost giving up, I finally sold my first novel without an agent to a wonderful small press. And my first novel was Whirlpool's Island. I was and am extremely happy with the way that novel was published, the editing, the reception that it got. But it didn't sell more than a few thousand copies, which is actually, not enough to make a living on, but it felt satisfying at the time. It's like, okay, that started to help me gain a bit of a readership. After that, I managed to sell that first original story collection, which had been much revised and updated and expanded and improved, of course, to a different small press. And again, I was happy with the way this story came out into the world. It's called A Field Guide to Murder and Fly Fishing. The story collection actually did slightly better than the first novel did, thanks to some lucky breaks and hard work of my publisher and myself. Both the first novel and the collection continued to sell in dribs and drabs, which is wonderful. But with any small independent press,
there are built-in limits. You can get it into a few bookstores, you can reach more readers online, but with the small press, it's probably never going to be in airports. Still, which is okay. I was happy with both Whirlpool's Island and A Field Guide to Murder Fly Fishing, and I still am. And I think that's really important. I think you want to be proud of what you're putting out there. And this is why you really don't want to put a book or a story out into the world until you've taken it as far as you can. And then if you're lucky, you get connected with a good editor who sees what you're trying to do and can help you make it even better. Because once you publish a book, it's out there in the world forever. And so that's really something to keep in mind. And it's one of the reasons that I think self-publishing can be a difficult thing, but let's not get into that right now. But just my advice to writers on this is just, go slow. Don't rush to publication. Make sure it's as good as it can be. Because I've always enjoyed the process of writing fiction. I'm really an advocate of fiction as an art form. It's a challenge that I love to embrace. The challenge of fiction is it's a lie. You know it's a lie. The reader knows it's a lie. So why would a reader read fiction if it's not true? Well, it has to be, immersive. It has to be entertaining. It has to, keep the reader's attention. It sort of has to come alive on the page, and it has to get at some kind of deeper truth. And that's a big challenge, and I really love that challenge. It's one of the reasons I love fiction. But publishing my fiction has always been a hard uphill battle. I, along the way, probably wrote a total of 3 or 4 other novels, which all failed to find publishers. I did get an agent for one. He was not able to sell it, and I'm glad he didn't because it wasn't ready. I'm still working on it now. It may come out in the next couple of years. Who knows? Or maybe not. I think the thing is that you should never regret the time you spend on a novel, even if it doesn't get published, because it's like a little MFA program. I think that writing a novel is the equivalent of getting an MFA in terms of the amount you learn. So you're always learning, and so if you love fiction, as I do, you should not think of it as a failure. And most novelists that I know do have failed projects, and they're wonderful things because they teach you to be a better novelist. It takes a lot of practice to get it right. It's complicated. It's a difficult challenge, and so writing some novels that don't succeed is not a bad thing. In terms of the subjects of my fiction, in one sense, I spent my early career looking backward. I went from autobiographical stories to historical novels. More recently, I've started looking to the near and distant future. So my most recent novel, The Afterlife Project, is what you might call literary speculative. It's a strange, dark, post-apocalyptic time travel story, which got me an agent, was a finalist for an important climate literature prize, and after 2 long, grueling years on submission, finally found a publisher, and it's actually done really well out in the world. It has sold well. It was the best book of the year pick from Library Journal and Toronto Star, and it's currently a finalist for a major national book prize, all of which, of course, makes me very happy. It's just wonderful to see. Now I've got the Gatepost coming out on May 26th, but none of this success means that the next book is going to be easy to sell. I think it's a constant battle to grow a readership. If your next novel fails to find a publisher, you have to go dust yourself off and start writing the next one. That's just the way it goes. It's a very difficult time. It's very difficult to be a novelist at any time in human history, but now maybe is particularly hard. So this is what it takes to be a novelist: creativity, imagination, but also hard, disciplined work maintained over years and years, and a ridiculously stubborn kind of resiliency. The ability to keep going in the face of both fleeting success and repeated and sustained failure and rejection. I know this is not a pretty picture that I'm painting here, but it is the reality of being a novelist. Novelists basically are passionate readers who yearn to create their own worlds and to give back to the world the kind of experience that were formative for them. At least that's where I come from. But it has to be something you love to do. You have to sort of need it psychologically, because there are so many better ways to make a living. It took me about 2 years to write the Gatepost, and again, as I said, and in this case, unlike previous books, it found a home almost immediately. I'm very fortunate to have an excellent team at Podium Entertainment. in my corner. I had the same editor, Diana Gill, for the Gatepost as I had for the Afterlife Project. She's very tough. She's very, very smart. And so we went back and forth quite a bit on the edits for this one. And it has become a much better book. Having a good editor is such a gift for a novelist. I'm extremely grateful for Diana and for the other great editors that I've worked with. In terms of getting the book out into the world, I have spent years teaching fiction and also having a parallel career leading international educational programs for National Geographic and others. And I've developed a pretty good community who are interested in my work. I am fortunate that I have a publisher, Podium, who is supportive about marketing and publicity, though, of course, like any author these days, I have to be knee-deep in that stuff. So I am. I don't necessarily love, in fact, I don't really like doing the marketing, but you got to do it, and it's just part of what, it's part of the toll that you pay for being a novelist. And also coming off the success of my last book, The Afterlife Project, I have developed some pretty good contacts among booksellers and other important players in the world of books. So, that's an advantage that you that's the kind of advantage that you accumulate over time. Oh, okay, literary citizen. Well, good literary citizenship is essential, but there are lots of ways to do it. For me, the biggest and by far most time-consuming practice in terms of literary citizenship is teaching and mentoring new writers who are eager to learn. I try to help my fellow authors spread the word about their books, writing blurbs, posting, reposting, talking up books that I've read. But I see it as just as important in terms of literary citizenship to be an advocate for the societal value of fiction in general. As I mentioned before, I love fiction. Fiction, I think, is a vital art form. It's even an essential art form. It's an art form worthy of celebration. It's an art form worthy of deep study on the part of those who wish to participate in its creation. And it's not just a way to make money, though if that happens, that's a wonderful thing. But in recent years, I do sort of feel like there's been certain slippage. A lot of novels that are kind of rushed to publication for reasons other than art and end up maybe being a little sloppy or a little thin in terms of meaning, and shoddy or unformed work gets put out there, and it starts to inundate the channels. We're inundated with a lot of kind of, novels, and some of which are very good, but many of which could still use a lot of work. So readers have to sift through these, and some readers just give up or become reliant on authoritative gatekeepers rather than, like the big five publishers, rather than making their own discoveries, and that's too bad. Literary success. Well, for me, it means finding a readership, knowing they're out there, which includes hearing from people who have really clicked with a particular novel or story and for whom it has somehow changed their lives, even in a small way. On a more practical note, I'd say that literary success for me means having enough people buy my books that it's easier to get the next book published. I mean, that's mercenary, but that's the truth. You have to have a readership. So that's literary success to me. But I actually do have a larger and more important definition of literary success as well. And for me, that means contributing to this, the fabric of our collective human mythology, which is something that the world badly needs right now. And I think that's something that fiction does. Good stories are essential to humanity because they offer a way of experiencing the world that's not possible in any other medium. On the deepest level, good novels are a form of communion between two distinct human souls. This is a rare and essential thing. If you think about it, we all live our lives alone. Even if we're surrounded by families and friends, we're stuck within our own consciousness. And novels offer us the opportunity to get outside of ourselves, to see the world from inside the perspective or the point of view of a character who is not ourselves, and to kind of experience the difficulties of a story, all the tensions and all the setbacks and everything else in the story from inside a different perspective. And that's what fiction does so well, and that's what's kind of magical about it. It can be a powerful antidote to loneliness. If you have a good novel, you'll never really be alone. And as anyone who has lost themselves in a good novel knows, it has the ability to connect human spirits across big gaps in time, space, and experience. So it's kind of a magical thing. And especially in this moment right now where digital media has kind of worsened, ironically, it worsened the trend towards solitude. We spend so much time alone in front of screens. We don't have the kind of connection that you can get from really deeply being immersed in a novel. I also think that novels, by embracing, or stories too, so fiction in general, by sort of enhancing our appreciation moment by moment of the real world, natural and cultural surroundings that we're interacting with, can inspire us to explore those surroundings more mindfully in our own lives. If we see characters, experience characters having these kinds of experiences in nature and the wilderness, I think that this can maybe inspire us to more proactively cherish and protect the planet that has given birth to us. So that may be a little bit ambitious, but that is definitely one of the things that one of my ambitions for my own fiction, and something I've tried to do in all my novels and stories. And if I can accomplish any of this, I will be more than satisfied that I have achieved some measure of literary success. Advice for other writers. Well, this is not original, but it is important. Read and study the work of authors that you admire. I mean, study them like a mechanic studies engines, or a carpenter studies furniture, or a forester studies trees. They are the novels that have come, that are, the novels that you admire, are your best teachers. So that's the big thing. Read, and read like a writer, really study them. And then the second thing is, don't rush. I mentioned this before, but don't rush to publication. Published books and stories are out there forever. You want to be proud of them. Quality is more important than quantity in terms of what you publish. So basically, my advice to writers is read a lot, write a lot, and no matter how old you are, don't rush to publication. That's my advice. Thank you so much to 1455 for doing this series, for including me in this series, and thank you for watching. If you have any questions or things that you'd like to follow up on, please feel free to send me a note at my website, timweed.net, where you can also find links to buy all 4 of my fiction books. And I appreciate it. Thank you.